What are farmers going to do? I mean, honestly, what are they going to do? The ones who don't have Amazon film crews following them around and who wants to be a millionaire to top up the income. I mean, what do you do when these subsidies start to go down?
There's going to be a sea change.
In 2008, while banks were collapsing and the world panicked about losing everything, Jeremy Clarkson did something that looked completely insane. He bought 1,000 acres of English farmland. Not because he was smart, not because he saw the future. He just wanted somewhere to shoot pheasants. 11 years later, forced to farm it himself, he made £144 in profit. A council tried to destroy his business. The government came after his taxes. Somehow, both disasters turned into a £30 million empire. Was Clarkson a genius or just dumb lucky? Clarkson's boldest investment. Picture 2008 for a second. Not the version you half remember, the actual feeling of it. Northern Rock had already folded, and the images of ordinary people queuing outside a bank to pull their savings out were still fresh in everyone's mind. Then Lehman Brothers went down in America, and it dragged a huge chunk of global confidence down with it. Banks that had looked untouchable a year earlier were suddenly begging for bailouts. Stock markets were in free fall, and anyone sitting on serious money was asking themselves one very uncomfortable question: where do I put this so it doesn't just evaporate? That question has one very old answer: land. Land doesn't collapse overnight the way a bank share price can. Nobody can print more of it. It doesn't need a government guarantee to still be worth something on a Tuesday morning. In the middle of the worst financial panic in living memory, it was one of the few things left that felt genuinely solid. This is the exact moment Clarkson chose to buy roughly 1,000 acres in the Cotswolds, for a figure that sits somewhere between £4.5 and £6 million, depending on which account you believe. A year later, writing in a newspaper column, he made the case for it plainly. Land beats what a bank can offer, and, pointedly, the government doesn't get a cut of it when he dies. He wasn't wrong on either count. He also, in the same breath, admitted the real motivation was pheasants. But I wanted somewhere to shoot birds doesn't read as well in print as I made a smart, tax-efficient investment. So the tax line became the headline, and the pheasants became a footnote. Here's what actually matters, though, and it's the part almost nobody clocks. He wasn't buying farmland as farmland. He was buying it during a crash, in a part of England where building is tightly restricted, at a moment when almost everyone with capital was too frightened to touch anything that wasn't cash or gold. While professional investors were frozen, a television presenter who wanted somewhere quiet to walk around with a shotgun accidentally bought it close to the bottom. That's not foresight. Nobody's claiming Clarkson ran discounted cash flow models on Cotswolds farmland in the autumn of 2008. But it doesn't need to be foresight to work. Sometimes the market rewards people who act while everyone else is paralyzed, for reasons that have nothing to do with strategy. Think about what everyone else with serious money was doing in that exact window. They were selling, not buying, pulling cash out of anything volatile, and parking it in government bonds, gold, or simply sitting on it in fear. The entire mood of the market was retreat. Buying 1,000 acres of English countryside in that climate wasn't a fashionable move, and it certainly wasn't the kind of decision that got written up approvingly in the financial pages at the time. If anything, it probably looked a little eccentric. A wealthy man doing something odd with his money, while more sensible people hoarded theirs. That's often exactly what the best-timed purchases look like in the moment. Not clever, not obviously smart, just slightly out of step with the panic everyone else is feeling. 20 years of hindsight can make almost any contrarian move from 2008 look like genius. But living through it, handing over £4 to £6 million for farmland while banks were collapsing around him, would have felt, to most observers, like the strange choice, not the safe one. And then, and this is the bit that really should annoy every professional property investor who's ever read this story, He did almost nothing with it for over a decade. The 144-pound decision that changed everything. For the next 11 years, Diddley Squat Farm did exactly what farms have done for centuries. A local farmer named Howard Pauling ran the operation. Seeds went in, crops came out. The business ticked along in the background, while Clarkson got on with the much louder job of being a television presenter who shouted about cars for a living. There was no 5-year plan, no slow-build content strategy. The farm was, for over a decade, just a quiet asset sitting in the background of a busy life, gently rising in value the way land tends to when nobody's paying much attention to it. Then in 2019, Howard retired, and suddenly Clarkson was standing on 1,000 acres with absolutely no idea what came next. There were sensible options on the table. He could have found another tenant farmer and carried on exactly as before, collecting rent, staying miles away from the actual work. He could have sold. Land values had climbed substantially since 2008, and cashing out would have handed him a genuinely good return with zero further effort or risk. There was also a quieter, less flattering option available to a lot of wealthy landowners in that position. Do the bare minimum, keep the land ticking over, and treat it purely as a store of value while someone else handles the boring bits. Plenty of people in his financial position choose exactly that path, and nobody would have blamed him for it. Farming 1,000 acres properly is genuinely hard, physically relentless work with brutal margins, and he had absolutely no professional reason to take it on himself at that stage of his life. Instead, he decided to run it himself. It's worth sitting with how strange that decision actually was. This wasn't a business plan. It wasn't a pivot dreamed up in a boardroom. It was, by every honest account, boredom colliding with stubbornness. A man in his late 50s deciding, more or less on a whim, to become a farmer with zero relevant experience, on land that had never needed him to be one before. Everything that followed, the shop, the restaurant, the planning wars, the television show, eventually the pub and the brewery, traces back to that one unplanned, faintly reckless choice. The first year gave him his answer, and it was brutal. After every input was tallied, every seed, every repair, every hour of machinery time, every single cost a working farm generates, the accountant delivered the final figure. Profit for the year, £144. Not a rounding error, not a bad month. A full year of genuine effort, genuine risk, and genuine cost, reduced to a number smaller than most people's weekly food shop. Clarkson's reaction was the reaction of a man who's just been told terrible news. Caleb Cooper, who grew up around farming and has never once been surprised by how little it pays, barely blinked. He'd seen this coming from a mile off. This is the point in almost every story like this where the sensible chapter ends. A rational person, sitting on land that had already appreciated nicely over 11 years, takes the win, sells up, and walks away with a clean profit and a good story for dinner parties. Instead, that £144 became the most quoted number in the entire saga. It's the number that ended up in newspaper headlines, in interviews, repeated by fans and critics alike as shorthand for the whole show. Nobody quotes the purchase price. Nobody quotes the estimated value of the land in 2019. Everyone quotes the £144 because a joke travels further than a valuation ever will. That's not a coincidence. It's the exact mechanic that ends up building the brand later in this story. And it starts right here, with a number small enough to be funny and honest enough to be believable. Clarkson opened a shop instead, and that decision, small, almost throwaway at the time, is the hinge the entire empire swings on. The battle that built Clarkson's brand. Here's where the story stops being about farming and starts being about something much more interesting. What happens when the system designed to stop you becomes the thing that makes you. West Oxfordshire District Council did not welcome the shop. Enforcement notices arrived almost immediately, along with tight restrictions on exactly what could and couldn't be sold from it. When Clarkson opened a restaurant in the farm's lambing barn, the council shut it down and gave him 6 weeks to tear it out and return the land to its original state. When the visitor numbers grew large enough that cars were blocking the country lane outside, and he tried to build a car park to solve the problem, that got refused too, while the lane kept filling with cars regardless. Every single one of these confrontations ended up on camera. And here's the insight that almost nobody writing about this story stops to spell out properly. The exact same planning system that was making Clarkson's life miserable is the system that makes Cotswolds land worth what it's worth in the first place. Think about what those restrictions actually protect. You can't throw up a housing estate on that land. You can't drop a distribution warehouse on it or turn it into a retail park. Those limits are infuriating if you're the person on the receiving end of an enforcement notice. But they're precisely why 1,000 acres of that particular countryside is scarce, protected, and only ever becoming more valuable, because nobody can simply manufacture more of it. In other words, the council fighting to stop Clarkson from expanding was, at the exact same time, defending the scarcity that underpinned the value of everything he already owned. He hated them for it. They were doing him a financial favor, whether either side wanted to admit it or not. There's a wider lesson buried in that irony, and it applies to more than just one farm in Oxfordshire. Anywhere in England where planning rules are tight, national parks, areas of outstanding natural beauty, conservation zones, the same pattern shows up. The restrictions that frustrate the people living inside them are usually the exact same restrictions keeping the property values inside them high. Scarcity, created by regulation, doesn't feel like a gift when you're the one being told no. It only starts to look like one once you zoom out far enough to see the bigger picture, which most people living through the frustration never do. Clarkson happened to have cameras rolling the entire time he was living through it, which meant millions of viewers got to watch that frustration in real time, week after week, without ever quite realizing they were also watching a masterclass in how restricted land builds long-term value. But the planning battles did something even more valuable than protecting land scarcity. They created a story. By the time 2 full television series had aired, watched by millions of people who tuned in specifically to see an accidental farmer clash with faceless bureaucracy, the farm had stopped being just land. It had become a brand, and a very specific kind of brand. One built on the entirely relatable feeling of watching someone get told no by a system that seems determined to make an ordinary thing impossible. You cannot buy that kind of brand equity. There's no line item for it on a developer's spreadsheet. No formula a land agent can plug numbers into. It exists because a council tried to shut down a farm shop and, without ever intending to, handed a struggling farmer the most valuable marketing campaign money couldn't buy. How a £144 farm became a £30 million empire. Once you understand that the land had quietly turned into a brand, everything that got built on top of it starts to make a very different kind of sense. Start with the number people actually remember. £144 from that first brutal year. Now look at what the farm shop alone eventually became. A retail operation reportedly turning over roughly £2 million a year. Same land, completely different outcome, once the story of failing on it publicly turned into the reason people wanted to visit it. Then there's the pub. The farmer's dog cost less than £1 million to acquire and renovate, a modest figure by hospitality standards, and it now employs over 140 people. It needed a car park built in a neighboring field with space for 360 vehicles just to handle demand. Think about that for a second. A country pub in the middle of Oxfordshire, drawing enough visitors from Manchester, Birmingham, and Bristol on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon that it needed industrial-scale parking. That pub doesn't exist without the farm. The farm's story is the reason it's full. Then there's Hawkstone, the brewery Clarkson holds a stake in. Its origin story is almost painfully ordinary for anyone who's followed British farming. He had barley he couldn't sell for a fair price on the open commodity market, which is a problem arable farmers across the country deal with constantly. His answer was to stop selling the raw ingredient and start selling the finished product instead. Turn barley into beer, name it after a local landmark. Let his face and his story do the marketing, even when his name isn't the one on the label. The results speak for themselves. Sales for the year to March 2025 came in at roughly £21.3 million, up from about £7.8 million the year before, making it, by some counts, the fastest growing brewer in Britain, now stocked in Waitrose, Morrison's and Sainsbury's, and served in more than 2,000 pubs nationwide. None of that, not the shop's turnover, not the pub's staff count, not the brewery's shelf space, came directly from the soil. It came from the story the soil made possible. Take the farm away, and the pub is just a building. Take the farm away, and the beer is just another regional ale competing for shelf space against 100 others. The land is the foundation the entire structure leans on, even the parts of the empire that technically sit somewhere else. There's also the book deals, the calendars, the merchandise sold alongside the shop, and the Amazon contract itself, sitting on top of all of it. A commercial relationship that almost certainly wouldn't exist in anything like its current form if the underlying show had simply been celebrity buys pretty house in the country. The entire commercial engine depends on the tension of a real, working, occasionally failing farm, not a polished country estate. That's a strange thing for an accountant to try to value, because the failure isn't a bug in the business model, it's the product. Add it all together. The land and buildings now estimated around £12.5 million, up from roughly £5 million at purchase, plus the pub, the shop, the brewery stake, the book deals, the Amazon contract. And you get analysts putting a figure on the whole operation, somewhere north of £30 million. But there was one more twist coming, one that threatened to undo all of it. The tax battle threatening Clarkson's farm. In October 2024, the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, stood up in Parliament and announced a change that landed like a grenade in the middle of British farming: reforms to agricultural property relief on inheritance tax. From April 2026, the full exemption only applies to the first £1 million of agricultural assets. Anything above that threshold gets taxed at 20%. For a small, genuinely cash-poor family farm passed down through generations, the kind that makes very little profit and has almost no spare cash sitting around, that can mean being forced to sell off land simply to cover a tax bill on land the family never intended to sell in the first place. Clarkson's response was to get on a coach with diddly squat, printed on the side, bring Caleb and Charlie Ireland along with him, and drive to Westminster to join a protest that pulled somewhere between 10 and 40,000 farmers onto the streets outside Parliament. And then came the moment that turned the whole thing into a genuine flashpoint. A BBC journalist put it to him, live, on camera. Wasn't this really just about protecting his own tax position? Given that he'd previously written, in his own words, that avoiding inheritance tax was the central reason he bought the farm in the first place. He fired back. The clip went viral within hours, and it split opinion almost perfectly down the middle. One half of the country saw a wealthy man caught out defending his own interests. The other half saw exactly the kind of dismissive, out-of-touch question they believed the establishment always asks when farmers try to be taken seriously. The government's position, for now, hasn't moved. No U-turn. It's worth being fair to both sides of that argument, because it's genuinely more complicated than a viral clip can capture. Clarkson really did write, years earlier, that avoiding inheritance tax was a central reason for the purchase. That's on the record. In his own words, And it's not unreasonable for a journalist to point that out. But it's also true that the policy change itself doesn't just affect wealthy landowners with television deals. It affects small, genuinely asset-rich, cash-poor family farms that have been passed down for generations, where the land is worth a great deal on paper, but the actual annual income barely covers costs. Both of those things can be true at once, and most of the online argument that followed collapsed the two into a single, simpler story than the reality actually was. Here's what makes this genuinely fascinating rather than just another news cycle. The very thing threatening the financial foundation of the empire was, at the same moment, being filmed by an Amazon production crew for Series 5 of the television show. Sit with that for a second, because it's the strangest part of this entire story. The political fight that puts the land's tax advantages at risk is simultaneously the content that fuels the next season of the show that funds everything else. Clarkson's problems have become his product. His setbacks have become storylines. His opponents have become, without meaning to be, his marketing department. The council that shut down his restaurant handed him Series 2. The government going after his tax position just handed him Series 5, but none of that makes the underlying risk disappear. Clarkson has said publicly that he intends to place the farm into a trust and survive the required 7 years to preserve its value for his children. Tax specialists have been quick to point out, just as publicly, that this is considerably messier in practice than it sounded on the steps of Parliament. Trust income is taxed harshly, and the agricultural side of the business barely breaks even on its own, long before you factor in the television income that currently props up the whole structure. And that television income depends entirely on one thing continuing: Clarkson himself, still farming, still failing in ways people want to watch, still generating the kind of content Amazon is willing to keep paying for. If the show stops, the brand fades. If the brand fades, the pub becomes just a nice pub in a pretty village. If the pub becomes just a pub, there's no justification for the 360-space car park in the neighboring field. And if all of that unwinds, the land quietly settles back into being roughly £5 million of very pleasant, very ordinary Cotswolds farmland. Still a solid investment, just no longer a £30 million empire. He's just turned 65. So here's where it leaves us. A man who bought farmland to shoot pheasants stumbled into buying at the bottom of a crash. A council that tried to shut him down accidentally built his brand. A tax fight built for headlines became free advertising for his own television show. Every disaster somehow turned into more money. But it all rests on one thing continuing. Clarkson, still farming, still failing on camera, still worth watching. Take that away, and 30 million quietly becomes 12. So, genius or dumb luck? You decide in the comments. And if you enjoyed pulling this story apart, subscribe. There's more like it coming.